Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anurekha Chariwag, Assistant Professor Savitribai Phule, Pune University. Today we are going to discuss the module on non-Brahmanical approach to the study of Indian society, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. As students of sociology, we know that understanding Indian social reality is a very complex process. Depending and based upon our theoretical perspectives and positions, we can understand the society in its various complexities. We have discussed about how we can understand society using structural functionalism, especially drawing upon the works of M. N. Srinivas, or we can understand the society using an Indological perspective by drawing upon the works of G. S. Ghurye. Today, while understanding the non-Brahmanical perspective by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, it is very important to understand that the debates on caste in India have not really engaged with the ideas and theories which have been propounded and presented by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So, therefore, this module is an attempt to bring together the ideas of Dr. Ambedkar in trying to understand the inequalities, hierarchies that define the very structure of Indian society. This module discusses Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's analysis of the study of Indian society, referred to as the non-Brahman approach. This approach is based on the idea that linkages between knowledge and power are real and its impact are what gets presented as reality or truth with regard to society. The crucial question embedded within this perspective is, how do we analyze India? This approach is based on the argument that for a very long time, India has been perceived within a Hindu reality and identity, which does not bring into the discussion the principles of inequality, injustice and hierarchy, and that Hinduism as a religious principle, thought and practice has instituted. So, the approach by offering an alternative perspective poses an alternative to an understanding of India itself. This approach is political as it exposes not only the politics behind knowledge construction but also implicates the self who are in the process of knowledge creation, consumption and distribution. Further, this alternative demands for a change in the structures of inequality as experienced by society. This perspective, built on ideologies of radical social thinkers such as Mahatma Phule, Ambedkar and Periyar, not only theorizes on society but also calls for a change in it. Their ideologies question the writings of officials and scholars who, while analyzing what defines India, drew heavily from the worldview of Hinduism and that privileged the Brahmins at the cost of the non-Brahmins. Such a Brahmanical production of knowledge was challenged by the marginal voices who counterposed this hierarchical knowledge with an emancipatory perspective which brought out into the open the complexities and inequalities that defined the lives of a large number of Indians. I quote Rege extensively here. She states that the colonialists and nationalists contested the function of knowledge in colonial India. For both, the nature of knowledge about India was essentially Hindu and Brahmanical. After the Second World War, social sciences discourses refashioned the binaries of Orient-Occident through the tradition-modernity thesis or indigenous approaches, both of which, glossing over the structural inequalities in Indian society, normalize the idea of knowledge and education project offered in India as Hindu and Brahmanical. Phule and Ambedkar, in different ways, by weaving together the emancipatory non-Vedic materialist traditions and new Western idea, and challenged the binaries of Western modernization and Indian tradition, private caste and gender with public nation, and sought to refashion modernity and thereby its project of education. Drawing upon the above arguments, one can clearly see how power works through production, consumption and distribution of knowledge within particular context. This argument could explain why it would be interesting to ask why sociologists in India did not draw upon the works of Phule, Ambedkar and Periyar for such a long time. One can even stretch the argument to ask why is that in certain parts of India one would find references to Phule and Ambedkar and not Periyar and vice versa. This is a pertinent question of what is knowledge and whose knowledge, not only within the mainstream dominant discourses but also of the alternative discourses that challenge the mainstream knowledge production. Kannabiran states that Ambedkar offered a multi-layered counter-hegemonic reading of caste that was lost on at least 3 generations of sociologists and accounts for several conservative trends in social science. Kannabiran conceptualized this in terms of silence in sociological work, which has great impact on how sociologists have approached and analyzed caste. Within academic discourse, there have been many discussions with regard to its conceptualization. How does one refer to this position, Perspective from Below on Non-Brahmin Approach. Woman states that Perspective from Below includes not only an analysis of the nature of social structures such as caste, but also focuses on the location of the researcher within the production of knowledge. It thus includes a politics of location, not only of the social reality to be analyzed, but also the location of the researcher that leads to a cognitive blackout of everyday experience of Dalit Bahujans. The module would have the following sections. Section 1 would analyze Ambedkar's analysis of caste. Section 2 would discuss Ambedkar's analysis of subordination of women, referred to as a non-Brahminical approach to the question of women's liberation in India. And Section 3 would examine Ambedkar's strategies against untouchability and caste system. Section 1. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's analysis of caste. Dr. Ambedkar developed a theory of caste by analyzing its origin and growth and the humiliating process of untouchability. He argued that in its classical form, the caste system involved in itself social, economic, cultural and political frameworks of governance of Hindu society. This form of governance based on caste, which was exclusive to Hindu society, is hierarchical and unequal, as it divided the Hindu population into social group called caste. Further, there are these made endogamous, restricting marriage within the caste, and in addition assigned civil, cultural, educational and economic rights for each caste and in continuance by hereditary without freedom to change. The entitlements of rights are not only unequal across caste, but it is also hierarchical rights going down from the high to the low caste. In this hierarchy, some occupations or economic activities are treated as superior and others as inferior. Furthermore, such hierarchy is maintained as it is based on principles of purity and pollution and impurity. Caste also provides a mechanism for the enforcement of the system in terms of social ostracism through a provision of social and economic penalties, including social and economic boycott. Then the question is why people followed this unequal and stigmatized system. Ambedkar argues that it was difficult for people to question the inequality as a caste system due justification from elements of the Hindu religious philosophy, making it sacrilegious to question it. Caste are referred to as a form having defined origin, which makes it difficult to conceptually change the system. Hindu philosophy provided divine justification for the origin and sustenance of Hindu social system, especially its linkages with concepts of karma, that one should perform one duty assigned to him by his or her caste and birth and never question or challenge it, and rebirth. Performance of one's karma or duty in this present life would ensure a better birth in the next life, kind of eroded any challenge. It is also ironical that change was embedded in continuity. The more steadfast one is in the performance of one's assigned karma or duty, the more it increases the chances of ensuring a better life in the next birth. The system structured around the principle of fatalism was rationalized as an outcome of one's deeds in the last life. So, there was no chance of change or escape. Jaffrelet argues that the lower caste were not in a position to question the inequality because they had internalized the hierarchy and also because caste system was based on graded inequality. What was this? The logic divides the dominated groups and thus prevents them from challenging the system. Jaffrelet states, in a society of graded inequality, the Bahujan Samaj is divided into the lower caste, Shudras, and the Dalits, and the Shudras and the Dalits themselves are divided into many jatis. The system is based on the hierarchical and graded entitlements of various rights to different castes, and the rights increase in ascending order from untouchable to a Brahmin. In this hierarchical arrangement, castes are artfully interlinked in such a manner that the rights and privileges of the higher caste become the disabilities of the lower caste. Thus, caste cannot exist in a single form, rather they exist as a plural number, interlinked to each other in unequal measures of social, religious and economic relations and rights. Thus, isolation and exclusion of untouchables is a unique feature of caste system. The Brahmins in this hierarchy are not only placed at the top but are also considered superior human beings, worthy of special entitlements, rights and privileges. At the bottom, the untouchables and lower caste are treated as subhuman beings or lesser beings considered unworthy of any rights. The disabilities are so severe that they are physically and socially isolated and excluded from the rest of the society. Isolation and exclusiveness makes them antisocial and inimical to one another. So, a development of collective consciousness is very difficult to sustain and nurture. The most pertinent principle of the caste system is the fixation of rights and continuance thereof by hereditary. The caste social order gives multiple privileges and rights to the higher caste, particularly the Brahmins. For example, in the economic field, every member must follow the occupation assigned to caste. It left no scope for individual capacities, choices and inclination. Such a stratified system was based on the principle of no freedom to move. It was thus not so much the existence of classes or segmentation, but rather the idea of isolation and exclusiveness which was inimical to a free social order. Such a structure was based on unequal entitlements of rights among castes and inequality in the distribution of those castes where the lower caste suffered the most. The way social and economic rights were assigned, there was no possibility of socio-economic improvement for the lower caste. The members were deprived of the rights to choose occupation, acquire property and receive education. It is thus important to understand that the unique feature of exclusive privileges enjoyed by the Brahmins and denial of minimum rights to the lower caste, particularly the untouchables, in order to understand the present day intercaste economic inequality, especially between the Brahmin and the others. One could analyze the manner in which this inequality is expressed in the field of education. Within education, the problem was denial of the right to education and opportunities to develop human capacities. Education was equated to the study of Vedas. All castes did not have equal access to production, consumption and distribution of knowledge. Reading and writing were the prerogative of high caste and illiteracy the destiny of low caste. The teaching of Vedas, officiating at a sacrifice, receiving grants and presents are the exclusive rights or occupations of the Brahmins. There is no restriction on them to take up other occupations of other castes except that of the untouchables. The state did not hold itself responsible for opening establishments for the study of arts and sciences that concern the life of merchants and artisans. Each caste managed to transmit the required know-how to its progeny in the traditional ways of doing things. Brahmins, Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas could study Vedas, but only the Brahmins had the right to teach them. And in this structure, Shudras were allowed neither to teach them or study them, nor even hear them. Strong penalties were given to those who contravened these rules. Illiteracy thus became an inherent part of the caste system by a process that was indirect but eternal to Hinduism, giving rise to illiteracy and ignorance. Ambedkar, in his analysis of economic relations between high and lower caste Hindu social order, involves a slavish-like character for the lower caste. The rule puts an interdict on the economic independence of the deprived caste, which required them to serve others and constantly remain economically dependent on the other caste. In the Hindu system of slavery, Shudras could be made the slaves of 3 higher castes, but the higher caste could not be the slaves of Shudras. Such an economic system was based on the method of exploitation rather than that of economic efficiency. The manner in which rules concerning the right to property, occupation, wages, education, social status of occupation, dignity of labor, rules governing graded slavery involved an element of economic exploitation, particularly of caste located at the bottom of caste hierarchy. What are then the consequences of caste system? Ambedkar argues that exclusion and discrimination are the most important consequences of caste system. The unequal and hierarchical assignment of civil, cultural, occupational and property rights among caste implies that although every caste except those at the top of the caste order suffer in varying magnitude from an unequal distribution of social and economic rights, the untouchables are excluded from access to any economic rights except manual labor or service to the caste above them. Moreover, they are prohibited from social intercourse and participation in several social and economic activities due to stigma of pollution associated with the caste. The caste system is not merely a division of labor but also division of laborers into watertight compartments without any opportunity for inter-occupational mobility. It was not only the division but also accompanying hierarchy in occupations, one graded above the other, which had led to social and economic gradation of laborers, subordination of natural human powers and inclination to the exigencies of social rules and dissociation of intelligence from work and create a contempt for physical labor. Thus, caste-based economic order entails adverse consequences on economic growth and income distribution. Further, the market failure associated with caste-based market discrimination not only adversely affects economic growth, it also generated unequal income distribution and induced poverty, particularly among discriminated social groups. Thus, fixed and compulsory caste-based division of occupation results in immobility of factors of production and imperfections in labor and market. Far from promoting competitive market condition, caste-based division of labor and occupation creates one segmented and monopolistic market situations and produces less economic optimum, denial of equal rights, exclusion, discrimination, subordination of one caste by other. Untouchables suffer not only from denial of property rights but also human dignity. Tel Tumde argues that Ambedkar had two important visions: annihilation of caste and socialism within economic structure based on enlightened middle class, and two, featured by emancipation of land and industrial capital. The final words of Ambedkar were educate, agitate, organize, where he stressed the ever-changing nature of reality and the need to be enlightened enough to confront it. Educate so as to understand the world, agitate against evil, and organized in order to gain strength to root it out. Ambedkar pursued Hinduism as emerging ground of caste system and thus argues for an alternative philosophy that would highlight the interlinkages between caste and material basis of exploitation. Section 2. Non-Brahminical approach to the question of women's liberation in India. Non-Brahminical approach interlinked hierarchies of caste, class and patriarchy to analyze the question, why are women subordinate in the society? Pardeshi argues that Ambedkar's analysis of caste help us to understand and explore the relation between caste and subordination of women. According to Ambedkar, that the key to caste system is not the idea of untouchability but the principle of endogamy, rule that demands marriage only within one's caste group. The fact of the matter is that perpetuation of the system required strict rules governing marriage so that boundaries are not transgressed. The question that Ambedkar asked is, how did the system perpetuate endogamy and thereby the caste system? Ambedkar argued that it was through the rules and practices governing the conduct, rights and obligations of women that endogamy was continued, thereby strengthening caste. What are these rules? Pardeshi argues that Ambedkar referred to four important practices enforced on women that maintain endogamy, thereby strengthened caste, such as practice of sati, enforced widowhood, enforced celibacy and marriage of child brides with other men and widowers. Through these practices, women's sexuality was controlled and regulated, thereby ensuring the continuity of caste system. It is in this context that Ambedkar refers to women as the gateways of caste system. In conceptualizing Brahminical patriarchy, Chakravarti argues that patriarchal codes ensure that the caste system continues, where there are a set of rules and institutions by which caste and gender are linked, each shaping the other, and where women are crucial in maintaining the boundaries between caste, and thus the Brahminical codes for women differ according to the status of the caste group in the hierarchy of caste within the most stringent control over sexuality. Within this Brahminical patriarchy, women of upper caste were especially the gateways, entry points into caste system. The sexuality of lower caste male was always perceived as a threat to upper caste purity of blood and so had to be institutionally prevented from having access to women of the higher caste. Thus, women of the upper caste had to be carefully guarded and regulated. How did the regulation take place? Chakravarti argues that it was through the process of socialization where young girls were presented with the binary visions of good, bad girl, daughter, wife, mother, virtues of being pativata and obedient and chaste to her husband, importance of virginity, following and never questioning her husband were taught, accepted and perpetuated by women themselves. Challenge to this principle was controlled by the right to discipline and to keep women under control was granted to kinsmen. Moral policing and the king, the state, also had the power to discipline and punish women for their errant behavior. Then, how did the mixed marriages come to be regulated? Pardeshi argues that mixed marriages were regulated by patriarchal and biased law. There are two kinds of mixed marriages: pratiloma, hypogamy marriage between women of higher caste and man of lower caste, and anuloma, hypergamy marriage between men of higher caste and women of lower caste. Though both were punished, the pratiloma marriage was not approved because in this case women had transgressed the boundaries. So punishment was excommunication. Here, Omved's analysis adds to this complexity. She argues that there is very significant connection between the illegitimacy of pratiloma and the legitimation of Devdasi tradition. She said that the temple dancers enjoyed some amount of autonomy in the village, but these customs were used to institutionalize the sexual accessibility of Dalit women for high caste men. Pardeshi argues that one can observe a significant sexual dialectic where the accessibility of Dalit women to high caste men is juxtaposed with the forbiddance of relation between women of higher caste and men of lower caste. This sexual dialectics informs caste interactions and behavior even in many parts of India in present time. Pardeshi argues that for Ambedkar, caste and patriarchy intersect as a system system to exploit women. But this system is not uniform, but exploitation varies in accordance with caste status. It is this intensified as one moves down the caste hierarchy. Pardeshi states that the exploitation of the Dalit woman is of a different nature than that of a high caste woman. Thus, from within a Phule Ambedkarite position, any claims to all women being a Dalit is only a rhetoric. To speak on behalf of all women is to deny the very core of Phule Ambedkarism. From the non-Brahminical position, the subordination of women in India is thus structured through the intersections of caste, class and patriarchy. Section 3. Ambedkar's strategies against untouchability and the caste system. As mentioned in the introduction of this module, Ambedkar had two important objectives. First, unite Dalits and Bahujan Samaj and then endow them a separate identity that would help them to challenge the Sanskritization process. Ambedkar implemented four strategies, which includes identity building, electoral politics, working with rulers, both British and Congress, and conversion to challenge caste. Ambedkar, by challenging the racial theory of caste hierarchy, argued that lower castes need to develop an identity which is not based on caste to regain their self-respect and overcome the division. So Ambedkar developed the identity of the sons of the soil, and Jafrelet explains that Ambedkar in his seminal book, The Untouchables, Who Were They and Why They Became Untouchables, argued that untouchables were descendants of the broken men and the original inhabitants of India before the conquest of the country by the Aryan invaders. According to Ambedkar, these broken men followed the principles of Buddha and identified and continued being Buddhists, despite many returning to the Hindu fold due to increased pressure from the Brahmins. According to Ambedkar, the broken men hated the Brahmins as they were perceived to be the enemies of Buddhism, and Brahmins, to deal with them, imposed untouchability upon broken men as they would not lead Buddhism. Thus, what Ambedkar believed is that if the groups defined as untouchables recognized themselves as sons of the soil and Buddhists, they would be able to transcend the differences of being divided into so many jatis and take a stand together as an ethnic group against the system in its entirety. The second strategy followed by Ambedkar, according to Jafrelot, was the instrument of electoral politics. He argues that Ambedkar wanted the Dalit to develop into a political force, and in that was convinced that it would be important to pursue an election-based strategy by creating a political party, the Independent Labour Party, in 1936. The party was not confined to addressing the concerns of the untouchables, but also included the demands of the toiling labouring masses. The ideology of the party was based on challenging Brahmanism and capitalism. But this party failed to gain in the electoral process. Though it was a Dalit political party, the majority belonged to Mahar and a very few other Dalit communities. As the ILP could not bring all the Dalits together, Ambedkar resigned and formed the Scheduled Caste Federation, arguing for minority status for scheduled caste in 1942. It depended mostly on Ambedkar but lost heavily as they had no organizational machinery, no network of party branches and only a handful of party cadres, and to this was added the immense popularity of the Congress, who were the driving force of the freedom movement. Jafrelet argues that political parties created by Ambedkar failed as a strategy. So through the formation of Republican Party of India, he wanted to create a non-caste based political party. The third strategy was working with the ruling elite, both the British rulers and later the Congress. Ambedkar coaxed, pressurized them to address the concerns, issues and causes of untouchable. Jafrelet argues that Ambedkar had an ambivalent attitude towards the British. On one hand, the British represented rational government cherishing values of equality with whom he could hope for a protection against the caste Hindus. On the other hand, he resented the British who ruled a foreign country with force and violence, thereby challenging values of equality, freedom and brotherhood. But evaluating both the Congress and British, Ambedkar strategically aligned with the British to gain maximum gains for the untouchable. Later on, he accepted the position of a law minister in independent India's first government led by Nehru, and later on as a president of the drafting committee of the constitution. For Ambedkar, this was a matter of strategy as he realized that it was easy to fight for the interest of the scheduled caste from inside the government. Jafrelet argues that it was through the efforts of Ambedkar that discrimination based on religion, race, caste, sex and birthplace were dealt with by giving due to right to equality, Article 15 and Article 17 that abolished untouchability. When Ambedkar failed to bring in uniform civil code to restructure the personal law, he tried to incorporate it within the directive principles of state policy. As the state shall endeavour to secure for the citizens a uniform civil code throughout the territory of India. Ambedkar then tried to legislate a reform of Hindu personal law based on Hindu Code Bill that British had evolved. What did the Hindu Code Bill propose? It had provisions such as equality between men and women on question of property and adoption, granting members of legal status to monogamous marriages only, elimination of caste bar in the civil marriage, petition for divorce by the wife. Such a radical change within the private lives of the Hindus was objected by many leaders from both the members of Hindu Mahasabha and the Congress. Jafrullah argues that though Nehru was attached to this bill, he did not have the courage to fight it out in the assembly, so he did not support Ambedkar. The bill was passed after much of the radical changes were changed into more tamed form. Due to this, Ambedkar resigned from the government. Though Ambedkar could secure some benefits for the untouchables, he was disillusioned with the political system as a strategy to bring about changes in the lives of the untouchables and believed it to be of limited use. The final strategy used by Ambedkar was conversion. Jafrullah argues that the idea of conversion to another religion to escape caste was based on logically evaluating Hinduism. Based on analyzing Ambedkar's writings and speeches, Jafrullah argues that the first instance that he referred to conversion was in 1927. It was in 1935 that Ambedkar announced his decision to leave Hinduism at the famous Yola conference. His famous words were, "Unfortunately for me, I was born a Hindu, untouchable. It was beyond my power to prevent that, but I declare that it is within my power to refuse to live under ignoble and humiliating conditions. I solemnly assure you that I will not die a Hindu." Why Buddhism? For Ambedkar, Buddhism formed the best possible choice because it was not only based on egalitarian principles but also that it was born in India. The impact of conversion was varied, for it was essentially the Mahas who converted and called themselves Bauddha, but despite this they could not escape caste hierarchy. Jafrullah states that not only did the Chambas not convert to Buddhism, but they also opposed any concession granted to the Bauddhas through positive discrimination. To add to this, many converted Bauddhas continue to follow and observe some Hindu custom. For Jafrullah, conversion by Ambedkar should not be perceived as a strategy of last resort, but instead as an effort to endow the untouchables with a new identity and a new sense of dignity. Conclusion. In this module, one analyzed the non-Brahmanical approach to the study of India, particularly the perspective of Dr. Ambedkar. What are the important ideas that it raises? The approach strongly argues that to understand India, one has to locate it within the complex terrain of caste, class and patriarchy linkages which structure the life chances and opportunities of people. It raises important questions about knowledge itself, such as what is knowledge and who creates knowledge. It is important because sociology in India has to answer the question raised by Kalpana Karimaram: why did sociologists in India fail to take cognizance of Ambedkar's analysis of caste, especially the conceptualization of caste as graded inequality? This is important because the system was structured in such a manner that some groups were always below another group, which made it extremely difficult to organize them together and unify them. Further, by theorizing women as gateways of caste system, Ambedkar powerfully stresses how the structures of caste system continue through the control and regulation of women, and how women of different caste have different experiences, thus questioning the universal category of Indian women. Caste system was thus based on the principle of economic inequality and exploitation, where economic and socio-cultural inequality was a direct outcome of its governing principles and its core where economic and social cultural inequality was a direct outcome of its governing principles and its core doctrine. We need to recognize that a society in India is featured by cultural heterogeneity, religious plurality and caste hierarchy. Non-Brahmin approach is crucial as it seeks to approach the study of India from the analysis of the everyday life of Dalit Bahujan. Such a perspective presents a picture of a stratified, unequal, hierarchical and violent India. Further, by arguing the politics of knowledge production not only includes what social reality gets analyzed, but also who analyzes it and how the analysis takes place. The effort is to bring the marginalized experiences right into the center of what defines, structures and represents India. If as students of sociology we have to think about what to take back from this module, it is 2 or 3 things. First, we need to understand that why did sociologists in India fail to take cognizance of the writings of social reformers, especially the radical social reformers such as Mahatma Phule, Periyar and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. In trying to understand this question, it will bring us to focus about how knowledge itself gets constructed. As sociologists in India have debated with the question of caste and that of patriarchy, but for a very long time did not feel it relevant to engage with the ideas which were written by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. This is a question that needs reflection. 2, the second important idea that we can take away from this module is this whole idea about that everyday life practices of Dalit Bahujans. That in order to understand what is India, we need to understand that Indian society is a structured society, a stratified society and a highly unequal society. Because of this, it is very important not only to focus on the ideas that make India beautiful, but also this whole discourse that we need to understand what reality and complex identity that India proposes.